Hello, my name is Sarah Rivers, and today we are learning about Noonan Syndrome. Noonan Syndrome may superficially resemble people who have Turner Syndrome based off of their short stature and the webbed neck. You will see more of that later in this presentation. So let's get started. The table of contents here, we're going to be talking about how Noonan syndrome is acquired, what chromosome number is affected in this disorder, what mutations are prominent in the proteins, and the signs and symptoms that you'll see if you do have Noonan syndrome or you're working with an individual with Noonan syndrome, and the diagnosis process as well as the treatment plans that may be necessary for individuals diagnosed with Noonan syndrome. Noonan syndrome is hereditary in an autosomal dominant pattern. So this means that only one parent has to carry a copy of one faulty gene in order to pass it on. That leaves the child with a 50% chance of being born with Noonan syndrome. So in the next slide, you'll see another representation on how that gene is passed on. There can be one parent that is unaffected by the faulty gene and another parent that is. So no matter what, the child will have a 50% chance being affected or unaffected by that gene. So there's a 50% chance that the child will have Noonan syndrome. And here we're pointing over to chromosome number 12 because next up we're going to be talking about what chromosome is actually affected. You have one affected parent, the baby receives one copy of the affected gene. There's a 50% chance of the child being affected. So here on chromosome number 12, Noonan syndrome is transmitted as an autosomal dominant genetic disorder, as I had stated earlier. Chromosome number 12 is affected by the mutations in the PTP gene. So those are the protein tyrosine phosphatase proteins. We're just going to call them PTP today. And this leads to a gain of function of the non-receptor protein, the PTP. And here we have other genes that are affected by those mutations. The most common are these first 5. And there's a few more that you might see in lower cases, not as many. The PTP family, they regulate cell growth, differentiation, and the mitotic cycle. So most of these genes play a role in providing instructions for making a protein that is part of the signaling pathway, which helps in cell growth, cell division, and differentiation. Physical findings vary greatly from person to person with Noonan syndrome. Some have minor facial abnormalities, while others may be more distinctive facial features. But the majority of symptoms are broad or webbed neck, a short stature, congenital heart defects, meaning that they're usually present at birth with these heart defects, and blood clotting and platelet deficiencies. That means that bleeding problems like abnormal bleeding or bruising tends to occur in these individuals. You'll tend to see and notice a wide chest, highly arched eyebrows, and these eyebrows tend to be described as diamond-shaped. An intellectual disability may be present, but they're usually mild developmental delays. And then lastly, in males, you may see that those individuals have undescended testes, and that is called cryptorchidism. So that's just another sign and symptom that you'll see specifically in males. In many cases, individuals with Noonan syndrome, when they're born, their head appears to be relatively large compared to babies without this disorder or diagnosis. Infants with Noonan syndrome may also have widely set eyes, and their eyes may be very thick and drooping as well. So these eye problems are present in up to 95% affected individuals. The jawline causes crowding of the lower teeth because the small chin or jawline, they're just smaller than most individuals. And there's excessive skin around the neck area, but the neck lengthens through aging, causing the webbed of the neck to be more prominent. Noonan syndrome tends to be diagnosed through blood testing. Many people will work with a genetic specialist for this testing. So in some cases, Noonan syndrome may be suspected based off of results in fetal ultrasonography, but most cases, children are diagnosed at birth or early infancy based off of physical findings or blood testing. The treatment of Noonan syndrome, that all depends on the individual and how serious their signs and symptoms are of this diagnosis. So specialists they may need could be surrounded by their heart abnormalities, blood disorders, growth disorders, and that can all be seen through specialists like cardiologists, hematologists, endocrinologists. Signs and symptoms tend to lessen with adulthood, though. Noonan syndrome is a genetic disorder that affects approximately 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 2,500 people. The genetic disorder does have treatment plans and specialists in place to help individuals with this condition. Most individuals with Noonan syndrome have little health complications in adulthood. Thank you for your time as we learned more about Noonan syndrome.